Alright, Colts Nation, I am back again, and this time we are talking about team needs, and more specifically, our team needs from a roster standpoint, and what really needs to change with these Indianapolis Colts going into next season. And yes, I know, the Super Bowl right around the corner, and yes, I am excited about the Super Bowl, despite the fact that we didn't even sniff it, we were nowhere near it. But what has me even more excited than the Super Bowl is this Colts offseason. I mean, when you have names like Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, Quentin Nelson, DeForest Buckner, Kenny Moore, the premier names of our team, the guys that I view as the cornerstones of this franchise, being talked about in Colts circles as potential candidates to be traded. I mean, you know we are in for one hell of an offseason, for better or for worse. So, I mean, if you're excited, nervous, anxious, interested, or all of the above and more for the Colts offseason, you have found yourself in the right place, because not only am I going to be talking about the Colts offseason today and next week and the week after that, I am going to be talking about the Colts offseason every single week for as long as it is going on, and then, of course, into the season, so on and so forth. Whether you like it or whether you believe it or not, I am never leaving. So before we get into today's show, I just want to introduce myself to some of the new listeners that I'm sure are coming in. So if it's your first time here, welcome. You're listening to the Riding the Bench Colts Cast, a podcast made by a Colts fan for Colts fans. I am your host, Justin Alfiero, bringing you today's episode from my bedroom studio. As you can tell, so if you are a Colts fan and you're looking to help out a Colts fan, shoot the video a like. That helps the cause tremendously, helps more people see it. And if you want to subscribe, great. If you don't, I think I'll get you eventually, but most importantly of all of those things, I just want you to enjoy this show and enjoy the discussion, essentially. So with that, let's get into the show. And I know what you're thinking. Roster already? I mean, we don't even have a head coach. And I get you, I know, but it's hard to talk about a head coach. I don't know what makes a good coach. I mean, I could just talk resumes and then go from there, right? But I have played football before, believe it or not. I know it's hard to tell. So for me, it's a little easier to talk about what happens on the field and to talk about those guys. And, you know, we're a month away from free agency, around give or take, and then a little over 2 months away from the draft. But, guys, I'm telling you, and maybe a girl, it's going to be here before you know it. And after a season like this, where we struggled so much, you have to think, coming into the season, a lot of us really thought we were a quarterback away. I mean, I know now, in hindsight, it's easy to just look at the Matt Ryan move and be like, oh, what a disaster. Chris Ballard stinks. This, that, the next thing. But a lot of us, including you probably, were very, very excited coming into this season. And now, all of a sudden, wow, what one season can change, right? What we learned this season is that we are more than just a quarterback away. I think a quarterback would definitely help us patch up some things, but we really need to figure out more than just that. So we want to talk about and we want to get into which positions need to be addressed outside of the quarterback. And then with that, once you get that going, which key players on the roster have contracts that are expiring? Because that's going to affect our draft. That's going to affect free agency and how we approach everything, right? And then to piggyback off of that, when you talk about team needs, what should we be addressing through free agency? And what should we be addressing through the draft? And I don't have all the answers here. The only reason I bring up these questions is to get you thinking about it, because it's easy to say we need stuff. What becomes much more difficult is figuring out what should be draft capital and what should be like straight money right now. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. And I know it's a little early also to be talking about specifically who we should sign, as we don't technically know who's being retained. But again, I do want to just get us thinking about what's to come. And I figure we could just start about figuring out where we should be focusing our attention, where we need to add or upgrade some pieces. And then, of course, we could go into some of those guys with the expiring contracts. And then, going into basically just everything I just said. So let me just lay out the groups that I think need to be better going into next season. Now, it doesn't technically mean we need to add to them, but they need to be better. They let us down. And then that'll guide the rest of the conversation. So for me, it really comes down to 4 groups, which in fairness is like a lot of groups, right? But QB, obviously, so we'll leave that one out. The offensive line, particularly that right guard spot, and some would say that left tackle spot as well, and I'm not technically off, I'm not disagreeing with you per se, but for sure the offensive line needed to be better this year. And then we look at that wide receiver room, maybe, perhaps. I'm not sure. It's hard to tell if the lack of production there was just a product of the poor quarterback play and the poor offensive line play. You wonder if those two things were working together, if some of these wide receivers would have really done well. I mean, a guy like Paris Campbell, for example, was what, 10th, 11th? I believe top 10 in terms of separation per route. I mean, that is a very, very powerful stat. For those of you who don't understand the nerdy terminology, it means Paris Campbell was open a lot and we couldn't get him the ball. And then, of course, that pass rush, just the pass rush, we just can't seem to figure that one out. So, of course, that's going to need to get better going into next season as well. So now, all that being said, let's get into some of the expiring contracts. I'm going to quickly pull up a page with some of those guys because I don't have them all memorized. I have some of the big ones, but let's get into that. And I want to start with the pass rush because I think we have a guy in Yannick Ngakoue that's probably pretty polarizing, right? Do we want to keep Yannick Ngakoue? It's a tough spot, $13 million, one of the bigger names in free agency this year. And, what are we going to do there? It's tough. You can't have Yannick Ngakoue in on every single stop or every single snap, right? He's kind of a guy that, is really not there in those run-stopping situations. So I think he becomes one of the more difficult situations this offseason, particularly as we talk about the pass rush. We agree that it needs to be better, but we also know that he was our best pass rusher, right? So I believe that's complicated. A Paris Campbell and Ashton Doolin, right, in that wide receiver room. What do we want to do there? Paris Campbell, for me, I'd like to keep him around. Ashton Doolin, I could take or leave. I was really expecting him to take a big step for us this season. He really didn't. He kind of pulled the Zach Pascal on us, We put him in a position. A lot of people liked him. We thought he flashed, and all of a sudden, he just didn't do much for us. And then when you think of a Zach Pascal, went to Philly, there in the Super Bowl. Have you heard his name once the entire playoffs? So an Ashton Doolin, I've been a fan of, but I could take him or leave him. We look at the offensive line, the two big names, in fact, maybe the only names as I'm looking at this, that we won't have next year, that we had this year are Dennis Kelly and, of course, Matt Pryor, please. But Dennis Kelly, I've heard some talk about people just want him gone. I'm not technically saying we just need to retain him at all costs, right? But at the same time, if we're going to, how many offensive line? If we get rid of Dennis Kelly, how many offensive linemen can, we get to fill that void? I still like Dennis Kelly as a rotational piece. He didn't do anything amazing for us, but at the same time, he didn't do anything absolutely awful off of my memory. A little energy drink. No, not sponsored by Celsius over here. Wouldn't mind, but, nonetheless. We look at Bobby Okereke. That's a big one. Not that it has to do with any of those positions, but that's a big re-sign for us. Ultimately, I think we end up letting him go. But for me, when you're talking about the positions that we need to improve or need to be better for us, we're looking at that offensive line, we're looking at that wide receiver room, and then we're looking at that pass rush, as I said. And we have guys that played an important role for us this year in those positions that are hitting the re-sign period. So the question is, who do we re-sign? If you ask me right off the bat, well, no, actually, I'm going to talk about that after. I have this episode a little organized here. So, with that, now that we've looked at some of those expiring contracts, I want to go position by position here. And I just want to talk about how are we going to address this? What's the best course of action for us? Or at least what I think might be the best course of action for us. Again, very early takes, but I just want to provide a little bit of discussion for us, So for starters, quarterback, we assume, we think, we pray to God, any higher power, that we will be drafting one this year. So I don't think that gets into the free agency discussion, and hopefully doesn't get into the, the trade discussion, right? With that, would anyone be opposed to a Jacoby Brissett return as our backup and as a guy to help out this young quarterback? Anyone? Just tossing that one there. Curious what you think. Now, the offensive line. Here's the funny thing. And this really goes for a lot of the positions that we think really need to be better going into next season, but it starts with the offensive line. Do we have almost all of the pieces that we need going into next season in place? I mean, if we want to ditch Ryan Kelly, which seems to be a widely held opinion, maybe we could end up moving like a Danny Pinter to center who gave us some pretty decent work there. And when I say decent, I mean, I wasn't like pissed off at him at any point when he was in there. A guy like Bernard Raman, again, someone needs to tell me how to pronounce that, started to look very, very promising as the season went on. And then Braden Smith provides us with some flexibility. I mean, don't forget, he was actually drafted as a guard, ultimately before being moved outside when we had, was it Mark Lewinsky, dude's on the Giants now, right? With some tackles in the draft like a Peter Soronsky, Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, it's possible that you may see us trading a guy like Kenny Moore and coupling him with our second-round pick to move up into that mid to late first round and maybe grab one of those guys if they still happen to be available. And as we look at wide receiver, are we okay with the group we have in place right now at wide receiver, or do we feel like we need to make some moves? Right? Because here's the thing. Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Paris Campbell, these are all young guys. These are all promising guys, and I think most teams would really like to have some of those guys. So it does become kind of tricky here, right? This free agency class we have coming up this year isn't really that great. I mean, it's led by names. I think the biggest name in there is Juju Smith-Schuster. You got guys like Alan Lazard, Jacoby Myers, and agent Julio Jones. Do any of those guys excite you as an addition to this room? Do you think any of those guys make us better, or would you just prefer to keep a Paris Campbell? For me, I'd prefer to keep a Paris Campbell. If you're looking to upgrade this room, in my opinion, I think a trade is going to end up being the best option. Two names that come to mind immediately are DeAndre Hopkins and T. Higgins. Higgins now would obviously take much more to get, but the recent news out of Cincinnati is that he might be traded. He's going into his contract year. They're not sure if they want to pay him. Joe Burrow still on his rookie deal. Jamar Chase, I believe, the same. So you can't pay everyone, and unfortunately, he's probably the odd man out. Higgins would immediately provide us with a true bona fide number one. And as opposed now to asking Michael Pittman to be the top dog unquestionably, it turns into a 1A, 1B type of situation. And that's a spot that I think Michael Pittman can greatly, greatly excel in, right? And now when you look at DeAndre Hopkins, he would not only provide some great help for a young quarterback that we assume that we're going to be drafting, but he'd also help mentor some of this, what I already stated, is a young wide receiver group. And we may only have to give up like a future second-round pick for him. They want him gone. He's a little bit older, on the wrong side of 30. But for me, I mean, for a second-round pick for DeAndre Hopkins, sign me up, baby. And now finally, we work into the pass rush. Tough one, right? Improving this pass rush is going to be tough. As I said earlier, if you don't sign Ngakoue, what exactly do you do? I mean, great pass rushers don't exactly grow on trees, and he is one of the premier names hitting free agency this year. But we also did invest some serious draft capital into guys like Kwity Paye, into guys like Dayan Dangbo, right? So if you're asking me what we should do there, tough, but I guess if you put a gun to my head, right, I'd say that you just have to roll with the guys you had drafted, and I guess just save the money and just let them sink or swim, right? And then probably have another draft pick there in hopes that the competition has that iron sharpens iron type of effect. But Kwity Paye was a first-round pick. Dayan Dangbo was a first-round pick. So for me, it's hard to justify re-signing a guy like Ngakoue when you presume he's going to end up costing us anywhere from $13 to $16 million a year, and you can only use him like 50 to 60% of the time. So you got to roll with those drafted guys for better or for worse. That is just my opinion. So with that, we have gotten basically through the introduction, in my opinion, to how we have to be looking at this offseason from a roster standpoint. And as we get closer to free agency, as we get closer to all those important dates, that's when we can get into some of that real in-depth analysis. But for now, I just wanted to introduce you. So you've made it through the episode. Congratulations. If you made it this far, you could not have hated it that much. Maybe just a little bit, but not that much. So this is where you'd subscribe if you really liked it. And again, you could just shoot a video, a like on the way out. It literally just happens. You look, you just click, boom, and that's it. It's over. You never even have to do it again as far as subscribing goes. It's a one-time deal. And then, of course, if you've done those things and you're looking for another way to help out this channel, if you could just share it with one other person that you know that likes the Colts as much as I do, as much as you do, hypothetically speaking, if every viewer on this channel did that, we would literally double this thing week after week after week. Not that that's what's going to happen. I'm just giving you some hypotheticals. Big math guy over here. So with that, that's it for me. You've just listened to episode 7 of the Riding the Bench Colts cast.